Welcome. Thank you for coming to the Authors Hour. My name is Fred Thurm. I'm associated with the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We are the organization that sponsors this event and other events. I will tell you just a little bit about the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. This is the brief commercial message before we get to the main event. We are an organization that tries to encourage writers and writing at the institution and beyond by both supporting and supplementing the activities of the institution's Writers Center. So this is one example of an event that we sponsor, that we make sure happens. Stoney and the institution have enough other things to worry about. And thank you, Stoney. He's missing a lunch with the author of the week in order to be here. Thank you. But he did have dinner with him. Yeah. And later you can ask him exactly what he had. Other events on Sundays at 5 o'clock up on the second floor. We have an open mic for readers and listeners 18 years old or older. Most of us are older. On Tuesdays, right after the poetry brown bag, usually in the poetry room, we have an informal critique. Either I or some other published writer will lead a discussion of one page of your work. Please bring 10 copies just in case we have extraordinary attendance. We usually average more like 3 or 4. I said Thursdays we have the author hour. Just a few special events. One is coming up soon. This Sunday, July 9th on Vesper Plaza is the Authors Among Us book fair. From 12 to 2, local Chautauquans will have their books for sale and signing. On the 31st at 5 o'clock in the Hall of Philosophy, we have the Robert Pinsky Favorite Poem Project. Robert Pinsky himself was here X number of years ago and started the ball rolling, and we've tried to keep it rolling. So if you're going to be around the 31st and you have a favorite poem other than the Iliad that you would like to read and briefly explain why it's so meaningful to you, there's an application process. I believe July 26th is the deadline. We have a writing contest for writers of all ages. The 30th is the deadline for that. And on August 13th in the Hall of Philosophy at 2:30, we will have an awards ceremony. You can find out more about these things by going, as usual these days, to a website, a web page. So if you go to www.chu.org, that's the institution's website, /FCWC for the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. You can find out about all these things, and you can also find out how to join and help these events continue. Enough about that. Let's get on to the reading. Today we are honored to have 2 fine poets with us. The first is Sandee Gertz, who is a native Pennsylvanian and the author of The Pattern Maker's Daughter, a poetry collection published by Bottom Dog Press in 2012. She has published her poetry, essays, and memoir pieces in literary journals for over 25 years, including Green Mountains Review, Gargoyle, Poet More, Northern Appalachia Review, Wild Roof Journal, the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Poetry Anthology, and more. She was recognized as one of 16 working class poets in world literature today, and has won and placed in several award competitions for poetry and fiction. She is currently working to complete a novel set in her hometown of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and has lived in Nashville, Tennessee for the last decade, where she teaches creative writing at Cumberland University as an associate professor, and is also the managing editor of Novus Literary Arts Journal, an international journal based at Cumberland University in Lebanon, Tennessee. Sandee Gertz.
Thank you, Fred. A little trouble with heat, so I'm going to keep my water close by. Grabbing for it. I want to first thank Fred, of course, knowing him through correspondence and then seeing all he does up here is pretty incredible. And thanks Tony Toname, who's become a friend in the last year. He got to visit Cumberland, and that was a big honor. I want to thank him for his advice and just being great. Also, last week was the theme of friendship, real quick, but I'm going to extend that by recognizing my literary friend for many years, Karen Wyatt, who many of you know, teaches at Jamestown. I taught her poems for years, and she had Wearing Heels in the Rust Belt chapbook. She has her first debut full collection coming out from Riot in Your Throat Press, Avoiding the Rapture. Congrats, Karen. Thanks for everything you've done for me. So I am going to be doing a reading of Place today. I'm actually going to break it up a little bit between poetry and poems, and I think it will hang together because we're going to be in the same place, Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I'm going to be doing a reading of Place and hopefully a little magic. The novel that I'll read from later is a literary fiction work of magical realism based in the same place. Daleboro, more specifically, is where I grew up, and it was a steel town, and my dad was a pattern maker, and not a dressmaker, but a pattern maker in the steel mill. It was a job that inspired me because you had to be both artist and good at math. One of those things, obviously, not the math. But my dad was also a very closeted artist. It's a place of a lot of inhibition. He was the son of immigrants who came from Germany to work in the steel mills, and I'm the granddaughter of them. And it's a very old world place where not many things get in or get out because there's mountain ranges surrounding. So I'm going to just take you to that place in a few older poems and a couple newer poems, and then go to an excerpt of the novel. This should just set the scene for the neighborhood. Called Last Light. When all the sinks on David Street were clanging their evening music, Mother made lists and whispers, upstairs floorboards this week, next week, and out. Outside the earth was speaking, children ducking under clotheslines, neighbors checking the rags of tomatoes, while women retrieved the last of day's wash, rolling up the rope in tight, weary circles. On beds of weeds, I sat in the alley, listened to Mrs. Geisel's splashing faucets, Minnie Miller swinging maylocks in the next kitchen, a chorus of house dresses shifting, Brillo sliding against the stainless. This is The Pattern Maker, the signature poem for this book from my father. Lost both of them in the last few years, so this is for that. Johnstown, I want to be your Eugene Smith. Do great like still shots of men's hardened hands, blue veins around steel. I want to touch your pattern makers from the 1950s when they sized molds and shirts and ties, figuring their algebraic sums and Moxon's bar and wire, pencil in ear, like my father and his father, lifting their prints to the shop light, exacting measurements of what steel will cast and harden. Not everyone can be a pattern maker, old men on porches tell me. You have to see things no one else sees, like petunias blooming through concrete, up against tumble-down houses, rising shapes where there are only flat lines. Driving his Buick across Broad Avenue to the mill's iron gate, my father often said he saw himself instead turning the wheel and taking off for Route 30 West, climbing to the steep summit and setting up brushes and canvas where for years he talked of painting the sun. What did he envision beyond the craggy tops of mountains that rimmed our valley city, lulling all of us into forgetting there was an open sky? In the deep folds of the hills, German Lutheran men paced silent rooms, pushed porters to the edges of tired bars as pitchers of beer lower and foam. Hundreds are sent by wives to scrub in basement sinks, wringing their fingers under the copper faucet, while my father dreams of the deep black forest, holding his unopened tubes of burnt sienna. Today, when I drive the gray streets, small bent-over women mop porches on their knees. Smith would have taken a picture of the wrinkling house dresses, but I would capture the millmen posed on patios, gazing out to the Alleghenies, the patterns of each hill folding and unfolding in their hands. And this is a newer poem. This is a poem for my mother, which I feel like you should write something new when you're here in Chautauqua. And I wrote this last week in the poetry workshop with Zach Sapp. Always happen. Most of Earth's action is hidden from view, like the things you tried to tell me in the ICU, pointing to my silver bracelet, my mouth empty, though I was the interpreter, appointed by Dad who could not read your lips, the tubes to the throat, a lisp, like your ghost was already talking, while I guessed and grabbed at syllables from the air around us. I thought you liked the silver around my wrist, but there was more, the tapping you did there, insistent as your arms tied to the bed, mouthing, I don't want here. We expand the boundaries of our reach when stars appear, and so I tried again, birthing the formation of an earth, as my sister-in-law knew that death is much like being born, and coaxed you to the sliver of light. I wanted to fill in your blank words, but instead doubled over when I heard your midnight breath, the tectonic plates of our valley shifting. The rain comes in many forms, and sometimes it is a washcloth laid on the forehead when you're 12, and days of our lives plays on the unmounted top. Driving home at the streetlight of the old neighborhood, I saw you, pushing up the pedal pants above your knees in the dandelion yard to catch the rays on David Street. And all the artificial sun fell to the earth. It was the first time I heard God speak. Honeysuckle, thunder. It wasn't my bracelet at all. It was yours. Your name, a birth date, a place, the tapping, a translation. Transplanting the rosebush, Pennsylvania to Nashville. When I went back to work with children in 2003 in a poetry and art grant sponsored by the CA Council of Humanities, I realized it wasn't the world of steel kids just, having enough to eat. Hunger was a big thing with the steel mills decline. And being in that program for a month, working with the kids, they still thought it was Mayberry. They rode the bikes all day and never went home, but they were hungry, and there were a lot of truths and poverty. The last time I went back, my home was nearly condemned, and this is about that experience. Transplanting the rosebush, Pennsylvania to Nashville. And my son's birthday was yesterday, and so was my dad's. So this is like a year old, my birthday. My son digs the hole at midnight on his 31st birthday after 12 hours at work in hard shoes, no gloves to protect against the thorns of the dying rose bush my late father planted in 1972. He kept it alive for 40 years in an impossible slip of dirt and gravel we were given by the Milltown Zero lot lines. It'll never grow here, the old neighbors warned. Nice things should be in a garden. But they bloomed in the old world soil of Dale, a place of magic immigrants all placing their hand around steel like winter people around us. And my father tended to them as he did every shingle of the house, measuring and nailing next to mother's mopping of every floorboard where 3 boys wrestled adolescents and a girl dressed Barbie. I went back to find the house a ruin, the Bavarian iron numerals of the cellar door 191, now a 6 hanging upside down. I stood at the gate of it all. No, nothing held me back, except my parents' bedroom window open to rats, The gas shut-off notice on the porch next to a welcome mat that still said home. They say this place is blight, yet some neighbors still hold up painted balustrades and hose out their trash cans with lavender. I think back to how my mother told me not to cross to the house on the corner where Jackie smoked cigarettes and didn't go to church. The condemned sign, the talk of the tidy borough, then the dust, the only thing rising that day, the bulldozers pulled out and drove away. So I carried the branches of the rose bush in the backseat of my car. Under a tree of weeds, there were still pink blooms. 2 80-year-old neighbors dug them up for me the next day, saying, "We saw your face fall in the house." And yet it's been a week, too hot in the South to go outside, no garden tools, a list of excuses, until my son comes over to clink glasses and eat cake. And we talk about how it's my dad's birthday too, and laugh about how last year he was shoveling for buried treasure using a note his grandfather left in his papers. We have to plan it now. We put down our glasses and he digs as I think about all the things one can kill with action or inaction. My father would have never traveled to Tennessee, and yet I stand there expecting the shallow soil to receive the roots that they will take, like the branding of his Western Pennsylvania work ethic and the shared roots of teeth that never managed to grow an incisor. If it blooms, I imagine giving each brother a cutting of it. I hold the flashlight as my son digs for my father, for their shared names and hidden fears, though neither of us. I am thinking about the girl who grew up with roses, jutting out from cracks of sidewalks, and how she never knew that the difference between being blessed and condemned was a thin, fine measurement. As the thorn spikes lower into the earth, she sees they are both green and brown, and in her past, she remembers how Jackie's house became a garden. Oh, okay, so I'm going to move to an excerpt from the novel. And just a couple things to know. You're going to hear Pink Boy and Pretty Boy and House Dress Mother. People have labels and names in this borough I'm calling Shay. They soon realized that labeling and trying to control everything, including art expression and creative expression, is folly, but they do not know this yet. And this is about one boy. It's the neighborhood had the art and poetry program dropped in, and things start to get a little strange. And if you want to know more, you'll have to come to see it. It centers around also called the Republic of Jerusalem's trumpet, that centers around the datura flowers that grow only in blank in my neighborhood. The third floor attic room of Angler 404 Rear David Street was stifling during the week of the July 4th holiday. No one left Shay for travel. Beaches were too far away, and a filled tank was a luxury used by fathers to go to work. The children of the borough were left to anticipate the fire hoses at the end of the street, which were activated every afternoon in the high heat by off-duty firemen who sat with spit cups and watched the kids squirm in the hard spray. The glitter girls wore their bathing suits continually and jumped from the hoses to green plastic pools of unchlorinated water in the dandelion backyard, faint stains of algae clinging to their neon fabrics. Most people in Shay had forgotten about Angler in his room, or the fact he even existed, unless they looked up and saw a shadow of his face pass by the lone window of the third floor. They called him Pink Boy for his light skin and red eyes, and no one in Shay was about to change it. One chip paint opening in the attic arched out through a turn handle that was leaden and loose, where the boy lifted his chin to see the sidewalk, the chalk dust rising from another hopscotch dance that sister. If asked, he could paint the entire scene from hearing. Amidst the glitter girls' high-pitched, boy-tinged chants, he heard one girl jumping rope and felt her struggle for breath. Lord help her, he thought, as he saw her at 45 years old, struggling yet again as she bent over her children's cereal of the morning, and how she'd crawl one day to a phone upended in the soft pile carpet of her modular home on the outskirts of Shay. A husband off to work, a man in a truck somewhere on Route 30 when he gets the call, stopping at some convenience store, some roadside coffee in his hand. Damn visions, the boy thought. He didn't want to see them, didn't want the taste of salt before blacking out, and all he could do was watch the scenes take form. The girl on the sidewalk morphing into a grown woman clutching her chest. Why him, he thought. Wasn't it enough he sat enclosed in the four walls he grew to love, in the way they bent to his imaginings and disappeared from his peripheral vision when he picked up the paintbrush and stroked, hungry and satisfied with more canvas, more stretched linen, more scraps that Pretty Boy brought him, as though he knew already his hunger, the timing of his clockwork pangs, and how, when he painted, the walls became oceans and sand dunes rising out into a path of pinkish light. When he painted, it was summer. It was summer when he truly lived, if living meant sweating out of all his body water, at times the floating when the hunger for his breath and the pangs of his stomach met and rose to the place of empty. In the winter, there was food because there was school, even though he rode the bus mute and invisible to the other gay voices on the route across Highland Avenue. No food in summer except the scraps his siblings brought back from the fire hall's federal breakfast and lunch, the dry crusts or powdery remnants of donuts, and maybe a small box of cereal his brother had tucked under his arm like a football. He'd toss it up the stairs as he changed into practice gear from his second floor stand room full of trophies on shelves and the posters of bands and girls. The boy accepted the tokens like tickets he was collecting in some game. All over the floor were small kernels of snap, crackle, and pop. Pink Boy left his perch, looking at the day and its colorings of the day, another perfect one in which the boys and girls of the borough would ride the streets on rusted bikes, pastel streamers flying behind them to a gathering place of concrete steps, an abandoned house where his sister said they saw a ghost dress, and back to the next door porch where they talked to the woman teaching them how to write poems. He painted. He didn't care what he was missing outside. Pink Boy walked to the corner of the low-slung ceiling area where he kept his paint shoved under a mattress. He pulled them out, anticipating the surge in his veins he always felt as he walked to the plastic jug of water he kept half for thirst and half for wet paintbrushes. He had a palette Pretty Boy had bought him around afternoon when it was cool and all the children had gone to the woods. He heard the rap at the door. Pretty Boy stood there with his silk buttons and tucked vanilla shirt and creased black pants. His leisure jacket was periwinkle blue. His shoes were Goodwill and signed, and he was sure his socks matched and had the lines in them that marked them a good Sunday. He was likely going to the Masonic Temple to bust tables or take tickets at the door from men with high hats and secret chants. He held a plastic grocery bag, the kind that did not invite attention. He smiled a gleaming half-white teeth smile and half-brassy fillings showing a little at the sides. His signature golden watch that every one saw flashing down the streets of Shea, inviting whoops and stares and resigned tips of grandmothers who looked the other way and then back through his puffs of feathered bangs. Even a grandmother could admire how they stood erect at the top of his forehead. Pretty Boy, whoo, everyone called to him as he danced to a radio at his ear, twirling like some John Travolta plastic figure on a teenage girl's cake. He ain't doing no harm, most wives of Shea said, as long as he just keeps walking. He alighted to Pink Boy's room, taking the steps by twos. He brought out two slim tubes, burnt sienna, cerulean blue. The tops were knocked off once, probably by some senior at the downtown center where Pretty Boy volunteered for a meal and change. Pink Boy squealed a little, took a bite of the red apple the man produced from his leisure suit pocket. Put a little peanut butter on that second one, okay? It will stick with you good. Pink Boy nodded, glad for the mouthfuls, but more buzz from holding new paints in his hands. His hands twitched when he got excited like that. Let me see what you got from last week, Pink Boy demanded, stealing a look into the depths of his wristwatch. He sat down straight back, looking to see evidence of his lessons, as though he could see Pink Boy's bright visions and his unmixed red splashes. Pretty Boy held a wooden snatch of a beadboard from a ceiling demolished on Messenger Street. He held the board to the slivers of sun coming through the tiny window, and a chill seemed to run through him in the stifling attic. He gave no praise, but mumbled something about the 2 o'clock bus. Pink Boy knew he was pleased. If he was not pleased, Pretty Boy always said so. His golden smile flattened, and he didn't look like the man who would arrive and dance down the purple and peach chalk sidewalks, twirling to Motown, shooting smiles at the house-dressed mothers. As he was leaving, he placed his hands on Big Boy's shoulders with a raw infusion of some emotion neither could fully discern. The boy took it as a hug he could not give out of fear. Out of that enclosed space of shade he too saw when he put down the brush and the walls were no longer sandy with flowing sea, just walls. After Pretty Boy glided down the stairs, his pupil propped himself on his sagging mattress and looked out the window to his teacher's dance on the street, to his twisting body that offered some palpable vibration of joy, some prick of darkness. Nancy, you have to come out, you know.
Thank you, Sandy. You're impressively versatile. And since I was in that workshop last week, I can share a secret. The poem about the bracelet and the hospital, that was about an 8-minute, or basically an 8-minute in-class exercise, which as a writer I say is unfair. Anyway, just a reminder about one other event today. The Skillis, the author of the week, Percival Everett, will be speaking about his novel, Dr. No, at 3:30 in the Hall of Philosophy. Let us get to our next reader. Anne E. Wallace is the 2023-24 Poet Laureate of Jersey City. A poet, essayist, and chronic illness advocate, she is an English professor at New Jersey City University. Her new poetry collection, Days of Grace and Silence, a chronicle of COVID's long haul, is forthcoming from Kelsey Books in February 2024. The collection documents through poems written in real time for severe acute COVID-19 infection in spring 2020 and 3 years of living through long COVID alongside her also sick teenage daughters, with illness, healing, and hope laid against a national and global background of pandemic grief, crisis, and resilience. She is host and co-producer of Saturday Morning Poetry with Anne Wallace for the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. And her first collection, Counting by Seven, was published by Main Street Rag in 2019. Her work has been featured in Huffington Post, Snapdragon, Word Gathering, Gyroscope Review, and many other journals, including the upcoming 150th anniversary issue of Chautauqua. Congratulations. You can follow her on Instagram at AnneWallace409 or read her work at AnneWallacePhD.com. Give you Anne Wallace.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. It's really an honor and a delight. Thank you also to Tony for his work in directing the Literary Arts program. Again, it's an honor to be here. I'm going to set my timer as well. Oh, I wanted to say one thing. I do have a few printouts of what I'm going to be sharing today because I know not everybody has, some people struggle to hear microphones and it's easier to follow along. So there are only 4 copies. So I'm losing my papers here. One moment. Goodness. Oh, this is not. I get it. All right, one moment. I'm going to set my timer. Okay, so I'd like to start with 2 poems from my first collection, Counting by Sevens. I have copies of it over there. The first one, because this is Chautauqua, I had to read a Chautauqua-inspired poem. It's an old one, because it's about my daughter who is now 16, and as the poem says, she was 3 at the time I read it. So This is called Dare. The summer my daughter was 3. She skinned her knees, and she skinned them again and again. I bought Band-Aids, larger each time, for a knobby flesh wound, so expansive and slow to heal that she refused to straighten up, in fear of blood bubbling anew through the still raw skin. Eyes bright, she hobbled in a ridiculous crouch for a week or longer, self-trained to cruise near to the ground, laughing with bended knees. My knees, too, were always free. So often that I wondered how old I would be before bare flesh would be rid of crusted scabs. By the time I healed, I'd stopped counting the years. I was not a graceful child, but scrappy and fearless. Satisfied, I watched the ring of grime grow inside the tub as scabs softened to pale pulp each summer bath time. Dusty layers of woods, boatyard, street brought home and soaked away, the adventure of the day born quietly into porcelain. Scrappy and fearless, my daughter, with her bandaged knees, dares the world to hurt her, laughs and laughs when she falls to the ground running, or knocks her head climbing, holds the memory alive, satisfied, and she revels in the absurdity of so much fun causing pain. The fun memory. And some of that was written here in Chautauqua. I'm going to shift gears now. The third half of the the final third of this collection is about illness. Because I had cancer when I was in my early 20s, and I have MS. And as Fred mentioned, I now have long COVID, but this was written before COVID. So this piece is called Vestibular Test 2. In this collection, I've written a series of vestibular test poems. Vestibular testing is a test of the neurological system to find the root cause of vertigo. And they do that in a rather horrific way by sparking vertigo, by inciting it. And then they measure with cameras in my eye and such, and all sorts of things to figure out where that vertigo is coming from, the central nervous system or the inner ear. With MS, it's generally the central nervous system, and that was the case for me. So these tests were sort of all for naught because there is no cure for vertigo that comes from the central nervous system. But I got some poems out of them. So, vestibular test 2. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm doing vestibular test 3. That's the one in the handout. Have you ever counted by sevens? Yes, sevens. Not when you were in 3rd grade, but as an adult. It's not easy, the counting, but there is solace in numbers. I count by 7 as instructed, seated in an unfamiliar chair. The chair in its dark chamber spins and spins, the motion continuing in my body, even when the chair has stopped. Again, around and around, slowly, gently, then faster, faster. The doctor sets me in motion, orders the numbers secure in her well-lit booth I cannot see. My head secured in a brace in a chair not meant for comfort, with a back my body cannot touch, pitch forward, pitching, my head encircled by metal, immobilized, spiraling in the blackened cell, climbing upward, spinning. I count 7, 14, relying on known numbers, 21, 28, predictable, a small pride, I know this. It gets harder to remain distracted as the numbers go higher, 70, 77, into unfamiliar territory, the spinning again, unsupported, my back aches, unsettled, my stomach tumult. Ignore the tossing, keep counting. I know the numbers can add by 7, even as I reach higher, even as my stomach whirls. The spinning, I don't, but I can count on numbers, on 7, all the way up to 231. Now I'm going to shift gears now to 2020. As Fred said, my daughter and I got COVID. My older daughter, who was 16 at the time, and I got COVID in March 2020, before everything had even shut down. And I got sick and I didn't get better. Yeah. Now this is fine. I just need to book on it. Okay, so this is called Days of Pressure and Fog. My daughter laughed at my muddled questions asked on repeat. I forget not just the answer, but that I've already inquired about schoolwork, dinner, weather, what else? I cannot remember if I've been talking to her or to myself. I fight to break this neural haze, thick, so thick in the pulsing darkness, noisy and closing in, always in, on the center of clarity growing small and smaller, week upon week. I close my eyes in exhaustion against the drumming inside my head. My brain swoons and constricts, and I feel myself diminish as my blood runs low on oxygen. I fight not just for air, but for words, logic, for narrative. I fight to remember the story of me. I'm going to read a few poems now that are fairly short, so I'll just read them in succession. Spring Song. The sirens wail the soundtrack of this silent spring, a keening intertwined with birdsong by day, with my daughter's dry cough through the night. Life and death bound together, consequential, on and on, so that I no longer hear the sirens until I do. Home learning. There is no lesson here that my parents, could have taught me. There is no lesson here that I can teach my children, except find your air and breathe. Hunger. I suck in each brittle breath as my windpipe closes around the thin flow that sticks at the base of my throat, then sears into my waiting lungs. We call it air hunger. Is this what suffocation feels like? Or maybe drowning? Enamel. I held her hand cupped within mine, her brown fingers curled in permanent rest, as I applied a fresh coat of enamel to her nail. I did not know the frail woman in the casket, though I wrapped her body in the fine sari that her family brought, pulled silver bangles onto her wrists and brushed her hair, and I held her cool hands in mine as I painted her nails, wondering when her skin had last been touched in life and without worry. And I thought of the long, viral months when my skin too was untouchable, and I pressed the warmth of my palm into hers. Those were from 2020 and early 2021, that last one. I'm going to fast forward now into a little later in 2021, 2022, when I had a little time to sort of reflect back. So this one is called Standing in a Different Place. I have not strayed far from home. The tether of my oxygen held taut for too long, now flagging, since a warm March laugh around Walden Pond before it all shut down and before my home became a pulsing hotbed of virus, of illness for weeks, turned to months, turned to years. I have not strayed far, and yet the world has tilted on its axis. And I have too. I scan the once flat ground for a new toehold where I might find modest purchase, take a breath and release my tether, then engage these weary muscles and reach my hand up high, from my precious lead, groping for a new path of solid ground. My Facebook feed tells me that milkweed and butterflies are this year's sourdough bread and backyard chickens, as the pandemic has turned our attention from life that must be needed and tended each day and in earnest, filling solitary days, one after the other, with small tasks and gratification that is in sight, but does not come quick or easy. A year in, we take a breath and make space for the wild things that pollinate and multiply when we step outside and let them be, reclaiming once manicured city slips of greenery as the early pandemic bakers and hen handlers now relax into gathering seed pods for next year's bees and planting parsley for the swallowtail caterpillars to munch, each doing its job without ado as we learn to withdraw our heavy hands. This next one is the piece that will be in Chautauqua, the literary journal, which is coming out in December, and in online, and then in print, I think, in February or March. Lessons I learned this summer. 1. If you hold a detective spotted lanternfly in your closed fist, then throw it on the ground, it will become disoriented long enough for you to stomp on it. But first, you must not be afraid to catch it. Wipe your shoes and do not despair. You are helping save the trees. 2. Overwhelm has been transformed from a verb into a noun by self-care gurus peddling masterclasses and high fives online. It names the swampy place that holds you fast there in front of your screen until you find the power to log off, go outside, and listen for your own soft voice, too long silenced by the din. 3. To reclaim the sanctity of a space, you must be ruthless. Rip out the invasive and replant with seeds and tender shoots that have always sat quiet and overlooked on this bit of earth. You need not do this all in one day. 4. The boldest step is the first step, small but intentional, of your feet pointed off the crowded path into the untrampled understory. Trust the next step to come more easily. All right, I think I have time to do the rest of these. Note to self, 2 kindnesses are 1. Do you get as frustrated as I that some lessons do not come easy or fast? There are things we know deep in our bodies that we have learned through trial and error and error and error, and yet we must learn them again. I think you know this feeling of carving out space, of creating sanctuary within your home, your body, of finding the necessary beauty of silence, then inviting the noise to rush in when a friend calls for help. I struggle here to find the line between kindnesses, between being a good human and being good to myself. And truly, why do these things always feel at odds? And how might I lift my gaze upon myself if I, held a line here between you and me? But really, what I want to say is that I think our needs are mutual, and that maybe this note to self is a reminder to ask for help in claiming silence. Passages. It's been decades since my body held a narrative clear and simple. It turned to poetry long ago, when a refrain emerged, was repeated with life, interrupted once, then again and again. A poem always begins in the middle, or someplace nearby, because truly, have you ever tried telling a poet to begin at the beginning? When doctors ask me or my daughters how our illnesses began, oh, the poems we composed on paper-lined examination tables, each one of us a stanza braided to the other, no beginning and no end. The poet in me dares not ask, If we are always muddling around in the endless looping middle of the story, how might we ever write our way out? Thank you. And just two more from this spring to end with. The empty casing. Let's think about butterflies. Imagine this. If you have planters of parsley or dill growing outside in a sunny spot, odds are good that you have tossed butterfly eggs onto your pasta with the garnish or mixed them into your salad. Imagine. Have you ever seen the egg of a butterfly? Before caterpillar, before chrysalis? The minuscule sphere, a perfect glassy orb deposited by swallowtail or monarch or fritillary, and perched so delicately on a leaf or the whisper-thin stem of your garden herbs. I saw my first last summer. I watched as the brilliant swallowtail, she visited daily for a spell, found my bed of parsley. I searched for a week, leaf by leaf, until I spotted it, one perfect egg. How small, how fragile, how large my hands, my garden shears. The egg stood such small chance against a quick sniff at mealtime, small chance against hot sun that can wither a wispy herb into the parched earth over a few dry days of drought. It is truly a wonder we have any butterflies at all. But my patio egg, it defied the odds. It hatched under my protective gaze, grew fat off the parsley I did not eat, spun a home around itself. I watched and waited as it grew strong. Then one morning I found the empty dry casing still stuck to the side of my clay planter. The butterfly, it was gone, flown away into its new life. Thank you. And I will end with one called The Infinity of Hope. We talk a lot about the little things, the ripple of a stone in the glassy surface of a lake, circles pushing out and out and out until they join other circles and waves, each a destruction that begins with the weight of an object thrown or body, say of a dragonfly, landed where before there was none. We talk a lot about the little things, the small decisions or delays that mean you and not me, or me and not you, is in the wrong or the right place at the wrong or the right time. We used to call it chaos theory, the way one small action here has grand potential to impact you wherever, whoever you may be. Sometimes the ripples, they are devastating. The wave of one airborne particle headed toward me and mine, the way we might think an action is harmless because we do not think to look where the stone lands, where the ripple travels, because we are so mesmerized by the rings expanding with perfection upon the smooth water. But other times, the impact of the small things, it is beautiful. A kindness or surprise that spreads like a ripple into a smile. A day set into motion, expansive, unknowable, with potential that is infinite. So tell me, what small ripples will you release into the world today on faith that you may not see what stuck things they loosen? Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for those brave and powerful poems. It's nice to know that beauty can arise from some awful, awful things. And let's give thanks to both Sandee and Anne for their wonderful reading. I want to stress that both of them have books for sale and signing up front here. I hope you consider joining the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. Also, please consider coming back next week. We have Pat Aberbach, who's a poet as well as a novelist, but she'll be focusing on her third novel, Dreams of Drowning. and Sandee Rockman, with her third book also. It's Not What You Think. She's loosely speaking a memoirist that uses her own life to look at larger issues of interfaith relationships. We might hope to see you next week. Thanks for coming today. Take care. Bye.
Probably. No, I think. Oh, Anna's got her glasses on, so I'm wearing mine, so this doesn't happen sometimes.